didn't know a single Asian composer, like at all. I couldn't have named a single one. So it's great to see where we've come and that we can actually do this for Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So I'm very proud to introduce our amazing panel, Amritha Vaz, Joe Wong, Sherri Chung. But let me do like a real introduction for each of you guys. So what I'm gonna do is actually play a clip of each of your work. Let's start with Sherri, who this is a clip from the new Kung Fu CW show, which is pretty awesome. Let me just play the clip and then I'll have you introduce yourself, Sherri. Share screen. And there we go.
No. The sword is not meant for you. Careful! No. I have to get you to the hospital. You must get it back. You must stop. Stop. Turn on. Don't leave me, please.
Cool. You guys could hear the audio, right?
Not very well. It's kind of jumpy. I don't know if it translates, but
Okay.
it's
Well,
fine.
about that. Well, tell us about yourself, Sherri. How did you kind of start on the path to become a composer?
Oh yeah. So I probably like a lot of us. It seems like you guys all play instruments. So I was a classically trained pianist at first, and but kind of grew up playing music and doing a lot of music, like probably more in the church setting, just because that was just sort of the context of which I was growing up in. So I did a lot of formal study, but then I think a lot of the musical application was really in church and performing and playing in groups. And then when I was in my teens, I saw a movie that the score to it just really blew my mind. It was Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves with a score by Michael Kamen. And I was just like, this is what I want to do. So I did an undergrad in composition and theory, came out to Los Angeles to do University of Southern California's graduate program in film scoring. And that's kind of my sort of more formal path. And then, here I am.
Awesome. So I realized I didn't click share sound, so I'm going to play that clip again because people should hear
Okay.
sounds.
Great.
And here we go.
Jalan, no. The sword is not meant for you. Careful! No! I have to get you to the hospital. You must get it back. You must stop. Stop. Jalan. Don't leave me, please.
That is beautiful.
That worked. That worked.
That was sick.
So much better. Wow.
Yeah, this is my first time doing this, so bear with me. So next up we have Joe Wong, who has done, I mean, so much stuff. To the Boys I've loved before, and the Midnight Gospel, Master of None, which I really loved, and Aquafina's Nora from Queens. I mean, so much stuff. Here is a clip from the Midnight Gospel. Oh, yeah. Sorry, make sure we're good to go. There we are. Oh, I'm not hearing sound. Hold on. Oh, shoot, you know what? Sorry, Joe. I think I might.
Maybe I'll just sing it a cappella.
You know what?
Hey, I have a question. Is this being edited or are people watching us right now?
Oh, people are watching us live. So.
Oh, okay. Well,
Great.
oh well. Say la vie.
Put it up on YouTube, and I'll just play from there, because I think I was trying to be fancy and edit the clip down a minute, and I think I maybe didn't export the audio or something. So I'll just play it on YouTube. Here we go.
things dissolve in time. The way.
Cool. I mean, that's so cool that they made a music video like that. So Joe, tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of your journey to becoming a composer.
I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I started playing music when I was 6. I started with piano, and then in school, I was in orchestra and band. I played violin and clarinet. But when I was 11, I discovered drum set, and that really felt like the vehicle into the world of music that I loved to listen to, which was mostly all different kinds of pop music. And so when I got a drum set, immediately older kids wanted to form bands with me because there weren't many children whose parents were tolerant enough and generous enough to let them play drums. So I started playing in clubs and touring and making records really early when I was in high school. And by that time, I was mostly interested in punk rock and avant-garde kind of jazz music from the 60s. And then after doing some touring and recording, I went to Berkeley for a couple of years. And it was definitely useful, but I didn't feel like it was a perfect match for me at that time. So I left school after a couple of years, moved to a farm in northern Wisconsin, and started playing music all the time to kind of try to parse through what I learned at school and metabolize what I wanted to ingest and get rid of the rest. And then after playing in some other bands on the East Coast, a friend of mine from Milwaukee, where I grew up, contacted me and asked if I could help write some score for a film that he was directing. It was actually 3 directors co-directing it. And that film was called The Yes Men. It came out in 2003 and got a distribution deal with MGM UA and was in theaters. And at the time, I was also fixing people's computers, teaching music lessons, and working as a waiter. And the place where I was waiting tables was next to a multiplex, and they were showing this film that I scored there. So that seemed like an indicator of a possible, trajectory. And then from there, I ended up scoring more films for those same people, and that ended up leading to more work, first in the indie world, but then into TV and more studio stuff. And when I was starting out, I also scored lots of ads, which taught me to deal with difficult people and quick turnarounds. And then, concurrent to that, I've always played in bands. Most recently, I've been putting out music on my own as a solo artist. And then also I do a podcast. I've interviewed a few hundred musicians. It started off as drummers only, and then it expanded beyond that. But anyway, that's probably more information than anybody needs, but
No, that's so interesting. Like, your journey is so different from probably the rest of us here, who had a very classical, background and majoring in composition and all that.
Yeah, I didn't major in composition. I certainly took counterpoint and harmony classes and ear training, and got the fundamentals that way. But I did not plan on becoming a film and television composer. It was an opportunity that presented itself, and I recognized it as a unique opportunity. And I always loved film music, but it just seemed impenetrable. It didn't seem like a real career. Obviously, growing up in Milwaukee, I didn't really know any professional musicians, much less people that were scoring films and TV. So it just didn't seem like a possibility. And so that's why it's kind of great that it started in Milwaukee.
Yeah, well, we're glad you're here with us today. Next up is Amritha Vaz, who scores the Disney animated series Mira Real Detective, and has been nominated for a bunch of awards recently, and also scored an episode of Apple TV's Home, which I am going to show a clip of right now.
I remember there was a night where I couldn't really sleep so well. And then an idea presented itself to me. I imagined just a line, like this long wall. It was a very bold architectural element that would celebrate the handmade brick. When ideas are born, you have that incredible energy and excitement. You can't stop.
All right, Amritha, tell us about your path to becoming this film and TV composer.
I probably have the least compositional education amongst us. I started off in music as a violinist, Western classical. And when I was 15, I developed very bad tendonitis in my arms, and I thought that was kind of the end of my music career. I went to go pursue, I tried for a few more years. I entered music in my undergrad, but my tendonitis was so bad, and all those hours that you do practicing, 6 to 8 hours, in those practice rooms, it just caught up with me. And by the end of the year, my dad, who's never really been much of a supporter of my music, it's always been that's a nice hobby, but what are you really going to do? He had this crazy idea. He said, would you like to go to India to study? I don't know how he got that idea, but it was amazing, because I decided to go. And I studied in India, and I studied Carnatic violin, which of course is like a totally different technique. You're sitting on the ground. It's a completely different approach to learning music. And the gift it gave me was to learn to improvise, because as a Western classical player, you think of these composers as so separated from yourself, like they've got this, God-given ability that you could never reach, because they're just so, so perfect and so incredible. At least that's how I felt about them. And then when I was given like the permission to try things within certain parameters, like Indian classical music is still very rigid, at least South Indian classical music. It was so incredible. It was such an incredible journey that I started to discover I had this voice. I came back to Canada. So I grew up in Canada. I came back to Canada and I tried to pursue my music, but the tendinitis never went away. So I went off to my second passion, which was social justice. So I put music aside. I thought that was the end. Goodbye music. And I went off and did 5 degrees because, of course, being Asian, we can. I was like total, and also being Canadian, one can afford these degrees. It's not like. So I'm not saying like a multimillionaire. I actually could have, like my first year in law school, by the time that was my 4th degree.
Oh shit.
Yeah. Yeah. It was like that path. Actually, no.
Are you also a doctor?
No, I chose not engineering and medicine, but I chose law. And the funny thing is, I actually was the one who was motivated. My dad was thrilled. By this point, my dad was like, yes, you are following your passion. This is totally the right thing for you. And so then I went off and I did post-conflict law. And worked in Sierra Leone and South Africa and did like totally not music at all. Meanwhile, though, because I had learned to improvise, I started playing with bands and I started learning how to play different things. And when I was in South Africa, I also, made music there. But again, just sort of thinking it was a side thing. And I kind of hit the cynical wall of like international development and decided, the political will that's needed to make change isn't really going to happen for me. So I decided I'd go back to Canada and look for a job as a lawyer. And, life just doesn't happen the way you think it's going to. And I had these friends who were working on films from art school when I was back doing music. And they were like, hey, didn't you do music? Like, don't you want to try writing this music for our film? It's just a student project. And I was not having any luck getting a job as a lawyer, strangely, and perfectly. And I went off and decided to start working on films. And it was so naive. I look back at me now. I mean, how crazy is it to think, oh, I'm just going to switch jobs from being, the lawyer and like work on documentaries and films. But it was my grandfather who was like, my grandfather was a Bollywood musician, and I still believe that he opened the doors for me because I always wanted to pursue music, but I just thought I never had the chance with tendinitis. And yeah, all these sort of amazing things started happening and these doors opened, and I decided to take a leap of faith and follow them. And I met Michael Dana at like a conference in Canada, and we hit it off. And it just so happened he was looking for a music assistant. It's just like, it's kind of insane. Like it just, when I look at it now, like for all these things to sort of just happen and me just bump into people and them saying, yeah, come try it out in LA. If it doesn't work, it's, I just think of how hard it would be to manufacture these sort of things to happen, but they did. And I luckily worked as a tech support person at my university. So being like learning, computer software and kind of getting up to speed wasn't as intimidating as it, might be if I didn't have that grounding. So I worked with Michael for 5 years. I learned music and composing in his studio, which was such an incredible opportunity. And then I went off and did my own thing, did independent film, got into the Sundance program, which was an incredible validation and sort of boost to my ego and my sense of self, confidence. And then I continued to do independent projects. And then I found out about Disney's Mirror Royal Detective. And that really changed things for me because, up until then, I never thought I could write music for a television show, a 25 episode, network show. And I was very lucky because they knew that I had a major learning curve to still catch up. But because we were so early in the animation process, they, had the luxury of time to kind of catch up and sort of discover that my independent film ideas about a storytelling for 3 to 7-year-olds isn't going to work. Those like subtle exits that you do, you know, under dialogue, that no, you have to like hit the button on it and like, yeah. Anyway, great learning. And I'm still working on Mira, but also did the Apple project as well. So that's what I showcased.
So, you know, speaking of being naive, you know, when I was in my 20s, I thought by the time I was 30, I was going to get my first studio feature, and then I'd get an agent, and like my career would just take off. Obviously, it took me a whole other decade, and literally this month, I finally got my first TV show. And so the thing that has always been interesting to me is hearing about people's like how they break in. You know, how do they get that first big opportunity? You know, to be a composer and get your solo credit on a major film or a TV show. So let's kind of dive a little more into that for each of you guys. Let's start with Amritha. Like when you heard about Mira, how did you go about getting it? And how did you even hear about it?
Okay, I'm not the example that people should follow, because the first thing I thought was probably, I didn't come from the place of, wow, there's a Disney show, it's about South Asian culture, I need to be part of it. I was actually quite skeptical, because given the way that, you know, Asian Americans and South Asians have been portrayed in media and entertainment, I was a little skeptical at first. I was wondering, how is this going to play out? And also, I'm not the kind of person who has always adored princesses. I became a mom not long before I heard about the show. And you know, being a feminist, I was like, I need to do a show that like shows her that she can do anything. The more I delved into the show, actually, though, I discovered she wasn't a princess. She is a detective. She's this compassionate little girl. She cares about her community. The show was like super diverse. It wasn't just one religion. You know, she was a commoner. So the more I learned about the show, the more it sold me. So like, I think learning about what I've learned about myself is that I have to have a personal connection to the show and to the concept in order for me to really feel drawn to it. And I mean, look, we can all do the work. We can all, if given the subject matter, whatever we need to work on, we can do the work. But I think to really feel fulfilled, that's what I care. If I care about the characters and I care about what's happening, that motivates me. And so the more I found out about it, the more I thought, okay, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring. And I met with Jay Stetler at Disney Junior, and you know, he invited me to submit, and I did a couple demos. I got notes on the first one, and then I got the gig. But very well knowing that I was so early in the process, given how little experience I had, even if I say, oh, I co-scored some films with Michael Dana, like that doesn't tell you anything about how to score for animation. And certainly not animation for 37-year-olds. So I knew I had a lot to learn. So I really had to come in and recognize the amount that I would have to learn. So I had to really be humble and be willing to just try things and keep at it, because definitely my instincts weren't what was right for me at the beginning. But what I did have in my core is a voice, and I had my knowledge of South Asian culture. And that was my guide, that I knew how to speak, how to tell stories that were relevant and resonant with this community. So that's what I used as my guiding light that got me through it.
Cool. So hey, Sherri, I know you came from Blake Neely's camp of doing lots of additional music on God knows how many TV shows, doing all those superhero CW shows. You know, how did you get your first actual TV show as a solo composer?
Yeah, so I cannot tell my story without mentioning Blake, which, you know, it is amazing. So I actually did, when I graduated from USC, I actually was an assistant to Walter Murphy, who currently writes on Family Guy and American Dad, and was starting his third show, The Cleveland Show. So I was just an assistant. It was never going to be a writing gig. I did end up doing some orchestration for him. I'm still doing assistant work. So I think what was really great about that kind of position, like when you're an assistant to somebody else, when it's not going to be writing music, you know, he was recording on the Fox stage like every week for all of the shows. So it was like really amazing to get in that to get on that side of the glass, where you're in the booth and you're watching how a pro works with musicians, works with producers and that kind of thing, and works on the fly, and some days are just really good days for the musicians and some days weren't, but it was just a great way to see how you communicate your ideas and how you get things across when maybe sometimes something isn't working. So during that time I was doing indie films and student projects, doing smaller maybe commercial types of things, and I like, Amritha, what you were saying about, finding one's voice, because I feel like that's such an important part. Like when you're first starting out as a composer, I view it as like we're composers first, then we are film composers. Mm-hmm. And I feel like, finding what resonates with you musically, with instruments, just how you even want to work with your showrunners or with your filmmakers, like how do you want to work with them, finding that vocabulary, finding out what works for you, even just building an infrastructure like your organization and how you're going to put your system together and how you're going to do all those things is something that's kind of really the foundation of anybody taking a step forward. Like you have to get through those steps before you can move on to the next thing. So I think that I mentioned that because I feel like anyone out there who is wanting to know how you break in, like that's really where I think it begins. It begins with some of that infrastructure and some of those logistics, but also with discovering what it is you want to say on your projects. Mm-hmm. And so around, I would say 5 or 6 years after I graduated and been working for Walter Murphy, I had also actually attended right after USC, so 2009 actually, I think I forget which year, but I also also went to the Sundance Composers Lab, and that was Blake Neely's first year as an advisor, which gave us a really good. And he also taught at USC, so I actually met him at USC, and I did that sort of professional stalking, where you just kind of like stay in touch with that composer, just every now and then just kind of reach out and be like, hey, I wrote this cool thing. You want to hear it? Send me something of yours. And luckily he was very amenable to that kind of exchange. And so at the Sundance program, it was a really great opportunity, as Amritha knows, or anyone else knows who's gone through that amazing lab, is that it's a really amazing chance to get to know other composers and their work and have that one-on-one maybe, well, in this case it wasn't collaboration, but that one-on-one instruction. So that was, I think, what really solidified Blake's and my professional, like sort of the beginning of that professional relationship, because I just really valued the way that he read scenes, looked at scenes, and just his entire approach. So when he was starting a show called Supergirl, and knew he was taking on a lot of shows that year and needed to expand his team, and just reached out to me and said, hey, I want to see if you can, if you want to just do a little bit of writing for me, and just I'm like, are you kidding me? Like this is like the golden call. So I think this is like the golden ticket, the call that you always want to get. And that's not everybody's path, but that's certainly, I think, a way that's a really great way to break into the industry. And again, cut your teeth on something that is more higher profile, higher stakes, So I was, I like to think of it as working in your league and working, let's say, above your league or out of your league. Maybe it's a terrible thing to think of it that way in this sort of hierarchy. And I don't mean it that way so much as to say we all have to learn and we have to apply. And you can't, for me anyway, my path, I think, was just so perfectly fit for me, in the same way that it seems like Joe and Amritha and Goerge, like all of your paths are just exactly what we needed. So yeah, he expanded his team. I became one of his additional writers, and very shortly after I actually started a couple of other pilots with him that same year, and it just made sense for us eventually to do these co-credits. Blake is one of those people that, as many composers are in town, where when they identify someone, or that they really feel is adding to their team, they want to elevate that and they want to give credit where credit is due. It's not always possible to have a co-credit, so don't judge certain composers for not being able to always give it, but Blake felt that he was in a position that he could. And so that led to us doing several projects together as co-credits, as equal partners and collaborators, if Blake can have an equal, and then which kind of leads us to, the what happens, I think, in people's careers when you have visibility, and having a screen credit is certainly something that studios can look at and say, oh, okay, that's now we understand that name. So that the way I got Kung Fu, sorry, I'm taking up so much time, but the way I got Kung Fu is actually not having to do with anything Asian or female, but was actually a show that Blake and I did together called Blind Spot. And that was a show that we did for 5 years. And the producers and writers on that, one of the writers and producers went on to make Kung Fu, and Christina Kim. And she was just like, yep, this just is the right way to go. And, I think everyone was really supportive of that. So in terms of breaking into the industry, it obviously is different for everybody, but I do think the sort of apprenticeship, assistantship, additional writing is a really great way to go. It certainly worked for me.
Yeah, that's so great that worked out. So Joe, I first heard your name or saw your name watching Master of None, Aziz Ansari's show. Was that your first big credit, or and also like how did that how did you become the composer for that show?
Well, I can really trace every career opportunity I've had to some other sort of artistic pursuit that that was not with the ambition of building a career as a film composer. So for example, with Master of None, one of the music supervisors on that show is a woman named Carrie Druten. And I'd met her because my band in New York, Parts and Labor, my noise band, played in LA, and we were friends with Carrie and her husband, Todd. She was a drummer in another band, and we shared bills together at like The Smell and other kind of punk venues. And then something like 8 or 10 years later, she asked me to submit for that show. I know that they got tons of submissions. And at that time, I was also working with a partner named Didier Laplay, and lots of the music that they were kind of referencing was kind of obscure European pop from the 60s, which was right up our alley. We had all the same touchstones, and it just happened to work out. But that's how it worked out. And before that, I'd also scored a film with a Bollywood orchestra called The Pool. And I need to talk to you more about that, Amritha, but that was in 2005, and it was with a bunch of legendary Bollywood musicians, and a guy named Kiersey Lord produced and helped arrange that for us. He was kind of like a Quincy Jones of Bollywood. I mean, just a genius and a legend. He had brought the Moog to India. He started off as a drummer and kind of like expanded into a powerhouse producer, composer, arranger. But anyway, so when they were asking us about, well, can you guys potentially do Bollywood music too? Because we might have an episode that needs some of that. We were like, yeah, sure. We have already done that with like these guys that played on all the great like 60s and 70s, Artie Berman and with all these amazing composers in India. So it just kind of worked out. It was the right opportunity at the right time. And like another show that lots of people that kind of gave me traction in Hollywood was Russian Doll. And I got that show because from a few different angles. One, because Natasha, one of the co-creators of the show, was the lead in an animated series I did for Adult Swim that was much more obscure than Russian Doll. And then also I produced a stand-up special for Fred Armisen, and Natasha and Fred were close. And so I met her when I was doing that as well. And the reason I got the stand-up special production gig is because I had a podcast about drummers, and I had known Fred as a drummer long ago. And so it's all of these things came from just pursuing art for art's sake, or for, being in bands or making my podcast. And I mean, I think that what I've taken from that is, it's hard to just sit around and wait for people to give you work. And so whatever you can do to exercise your own agency and explore your own artistic voice, that's the best path that I've found. But I also didn't have an opportunity to assist anybody because I was not here until I was like midway through my career. But there was this weird thing that happened when, this must have been over 10 years ago, but I was taking care of my dad, who was really sick. And I got hired by NBC to rework the Mike Post Rockford Files theme song for a reboot that they were doing in pilot. And then it just so happened that one of my dad's friends came to visit the hospital and happened to be friends with Mike Post, and they happened to be in Milwaukee at that time. And so I went out and had drinks with them after their golf game that day. And Mike has been an advisor. Like, I never worked for him. He's had lots of people that he's mentored in a more official way, but he's been a valued advisor. So that kind of thing was really helpful too. Just luck. I guess lots of it comes down to luck.
Yeah, no, that's such great advice of not waiting around for the phone ring and just creating things, and oftentimes that leads to opportunities you might not have otherwise had.
Well, if nothing else, it leads to fulfillment in the moment, and that's what we're all after anyway. For me, it was always hard waiting for gigs to come in, especially in the early days, and I felt like I didn't have agency over my own creative output. And so only when I started really focusing on also touring, making records, making podcasts, did it, ironically, when I started getting busy with that stuff, that's when the composing work really started to pick up.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So, hey, my next question is kind of more for Amritha and Sherri, but Joe, if you have anything, please pipe up. I'm just curious about you guys's process for finding the balance of Western and traditional scoring styles to using traditional Asian instrumentation and styles and stories that feature characters and settings that are more Asian. Let's start with you, Sherri.
So I'm definitely wholeheartedly rooted in like this kind of like Western music, you know what I'm saying? So for anything that I'm trying to do that has more of an Asian influence or that sort of cultural specificity, I have to research, because it's not something that I grew up playing. I very classically, trained and even just all through growing up with piano, but also with it is in my undergrad as well. So it's something that I would like, unlike other people, like, oh, you went and studied it in India, like or China or any of those countries, that's actually not part of my upbringing and in my musical upbringing. So I do research it. In the case of Kung Fu, and that's an interesting thing too, because it's obviously a conversation that, it sounds like, Amritha, you would have had that same conversation, and Joe, you were just telling a story about, they wanted this specific kind of music. For Kung Fu, it was like we really had to talk about how Chinese do we go, how Asian do we go, and when do we do that? Because this isn't specific. It doesn't always take place in China. Do we need Chinese music when we're in the States? It doesn't always have to do with Chinese people or the Asian community. So we kind of came upon, well, when it does, then we support it with that kind of music, and when it doesn't, we don't, and it's a very intentional thing. So I would say that my approach specifically for Kung Fu is, I'm using more of the instruments and instrumentation, but not using the scales. I'm not necessarily I'm using more of a feel of something that I feel like resonates with, perhaps that culture a little bit, but again, it's not full on, I would just boldly and very humbly, I would say, I'm putting my own spin on it, and it feels a little bit, I never want it to feel irreverent, but it does feel like this responsibility that, like, oh, am I doing this because this is not the music that I grew up with. Am I doing this the right way? But I also am realizing that this is, it was never supposed to be that. If they wanted that, they would have found that kind of composer, or they would have instructed, in that way. But I do feel like it is up to an individual project and of course, your filmmakers that to really explore what that means. And I think that's what's really great about just film and TV in general, where it's not so black and white. So we definitely want this, we definitely want that. Sometimes they want, as you're just saying, sort of an amalgam, a mix of that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, I totally relate to that challenge of, just because we see it on screen, it doesn't necessarily mean we need to reflect it with a specific kind of music. In my case, Mira and the Apple home are so different. Apple home, this is about this modern architect, a woman who's thinking outside the box. She's really experimenting, she's trying new things. And so I wanted the music to reflect that. She's inherently Indian. She has really grounded Indian ideas. So for me, Indian instrumentation made sense. And because they're working with clay, I just had to be super lame, and I had to use Get Them. So because it's a clay pot, but I just wanted to really turn many things on its head because of the way that she thinks about Indian instrumentation. But with Mira, it was very different because, you're walking into a world that is a Disney brand. And so there's already an established sound for what is a Disney animated TV show? What is that going to sound like? But I was also kind of knowing I was getting a pass in that because we were already kind of taking a moment to examine, like, what would this South Asian world sound like? Because they didn't have a preconceived notion. They didn't really know how are we going to approach this? Is it going to be all classical music, all classical Indian music, or with classical Western music? That didn't seem right either, because Mira is sort of, even though she's set in a pre-colonial era, she's a modern girl. Like, she's a smart girl. There are certain aspects of her that are very modern. And also, even though it's a South Asian diaspora, so it's going to be shown all over the world. I think it's like 180 countries or something daunting like that. It's still primarily an American Western audience. So it has to resonate, it has to, while I always take extra steps to expose kids to multiple rhythms and different sort of tonalities as far as I can go, like, as far as like the first few episodes when we would screen them for producers, I basically watched their faces to see if like the 7/8 moments or the 5/8 moments were just like, making them like, was it gimmicky? Was it actually working? Did it feel like music? Because it's going to be Western ears that hear it, and it's got to be, serving the story. So in terms of the balance of Indian classical and Western classical, I think we've actually been looser as time has gone on. Originally, the pilot is actually sounds quite different, I think, from where we are now, because the pilot was still very heavy in the, let's just keep it really classical feeling. Whereas now I can get away with cues that are just tabla or just mridangam, and just like lean into that and be like, yeah, we just pulled that off. It's Disney, and we just did the Eid episode, which was such a big deal. And I brought in a Qawwali band and worked with them, and we collaborated on a song, and it's got Qawwali in it. And to me, that's like such a moment of pride that we brought in like Qawwali to like a mainstream Disney show. And knowing the sound, like, I feel really like that pressure, like you feel, Sherri, like you're like, I want to do this music justice. I want to do like represent the community the best I can. And I also feel like one of my aunties is going to call me and be like, Are, what did you do in that second bar and like the third scene? Like, they're all like so musically smart that I wanted like make sure I'm representing and doing it in a good way. But I also feel like there's a lot of sort of like power that they've given me to take those risks and try things and really push the envelope. So Mira is really not a traditional Disney sound, and I think I'm actually quite proud of our sort of meld and fusion of like Bollywood influences and like folk elements and classical and Western classical and Indian classical stuff. So yeah.
So we all know that TV deadlines are really crazy. You're doing an episode every week, every 2 weeks. I'd love to hear more about like, how do you guys handle, whether when your time as an assistant or now like building your own team, how do you handle that? How do you delegate? I know, Sherri, you work with Blake Neely, and he has, I don't know how many superhero shows now that are all wall-to-wall score. I mean, just imagining how to even wrap your head around that many shows is just crazy. So I'd love to hear any of you guys. Well, so with Sherri.
So, I mean, the bottom line is you don't start out with multiple. You start with one. Like, you start with one, you figure it out, you get your house in order, And I mean, it's a natural. I think it's a natural progression because, I mean, yes, I worked as assistant for Welter, so I saw how small his operation was. But he also doesn't take on more work than he can do at a time, really. I mean, in terms of writing all of it. But then I also, obviously seeing Blake, it was like he had a very small operation. When I first started, doing some writing for him, it was really just him. And to his credit, where what I've learned the most from him too is he still has his hands in everything. He still writes on every single one of his shows, and he does so many more than just superhero shows. But I mean, I think we all know those ones because we know that if it's anything superhero or anything animation, it's going to have like wall-to-wall music. It's just going to be the entire time. But yeah, in terms of managing and how you delegate, I have an advantage. I think it's an advantage because I've worked almost like every job in the industry. I've worked as a copyist, I've worked as an orchestrator, I've been an assistant, I've been an additional writer. So because of I've been the tech person, I've done all those things. Because of that, I know a lot of those different facets. I know the underbelly. I know under the hood of what it means to be the artist and be the admin, to do all of those things. And so because of that, I'm like, well, I know, and I'm constantly thinking, probably like the rest of us, and probably the way all of us do in life, how do I work smarter? How do I what are certain things that need to get off of your plate? What are certain things that other people are really good at that they could do? Just constantly thinking about what, and when I got my first assistant, when I hired my first assistant, I was like, I wasn't really sure. I'm like, I know I need this person. I just don't have any clue about how I'm supposed to relinquish the control and, that kind of thing. And you learn to do that because you have to. But somebody said something just really simple, but really smart to me, which was, for an assistant, start with the things you don't want to do anymore. And I don't mean that like in this gross way, like make someone else do it. I mean the things that you don't want to do, but because you don't need to do them, because your attention needs to go someplace else. And you just start making that list, and then you work in that sort of partnership. But the whole thing is very malleable. You have to be adaptable. I think we all know that, but just for listeners that might want to know, like, just don't start out grabbing for so many things. It doesn't, it's just start with the one, really, really rock it on that one thing. And then you'll figure out like, oh yeah, I need some help. And then you kind of build it from there. But I did have great role models, both Walter, Blake, there's so many great role models to learn from.
Yeah, how about you, Joe? Are you kind of a one-man operation, or do you have a team?
I have a team that kind of floats in and out depending on what I need. But for a long time, I was doing things on my own, and before that, I had a partner. But I actually like tight deadlines because it frees me from my neurotic mind, and it's taught me a lot about the creative process in general. And when there's that pressure, I am much less likely to second guess myself, and it's made me much more confident over the years. But I mean, I'm thinking about this a lot because in the fall, I have several projects that are coming back and new series that have been greenlit and a couple film projects. And so I definitely need to have a team, and I'm always thinking about the best way to bring people on board and the most efficient way to work. And I use lots of spreadsheets to organize all the projects. And I have like a filing system to file management, like stuff like that. I just enjoy the kind of admin side of things. And I enjoy, the musical side of things. And now that it's going to be beyond my capacity as one person to do that, it's just a matter of bringing in the right people for the right jobs and kind of bringing on assistants on a per project basis. That's kind of the style that I'm approaching it with at the moment.
Cool. So Amritha, I know when you got Mira, you had to assemble a team pretty quickly. How did that go for you?
Yeah, it's funny, coming from the independent film world, you think, oh, I'm just gonna do everything, right? And yeah, Sherri's like, I totally understand how, having done so many aspects of the job, I think there's some part of me that feeling, well, in my case, I was feeling a little cocky, like, of course I can do all these things. But I'd never worked with 25 episodes, the 2-week deadline turnaround. It's a lot of music to write. And because I also had a major learning curve of how to learn to tell storytelling, like the Apple Home TV project was such a satisfying sort of side project because it was I knew it, I felt it. It was so easy for me in the sense, not in that I got it. Whereas still writing for Mira is like it's getting much easier now in season 2, but it's still a major learning curve. And it's so smart to say, what are the things I'm either not as good at, or is such a struggle for me to do, or is going to take me longer than efficient timing permits. That's when you want to have somebody as part of your team. Like I think that's a great guide, Sherri. And in terms of for Mira, like I actually also started to see it as like this power that I could support other people who may not have an opportunity to get their voices out there. And I've made an effort to hire primarily women, people of color, women of color, because I was suddenly like, oh, wow, I have the ability to like empower other people who are amazing and have incredible chops. And I like a lot, that I get to like hang out with and talk to and like not be so solo, because we do so much alone. It's kind of nice to actually have that commiseration or like team feeling like, wow, I'm working with other people. So it was a mindset change for sure, because there's that sort of egotistical thing of like, I should just be able to do everything myself, shouldn't I? And I'm a lesser composer if I have to, work with other people. But the truth is, you don't get any points. There's no like better trophy or like, gold star for doing it all yourself. What I learned is that it takes a major toll on me personally, because I start keeping brutal hours, and I have a little 5-year-old daughter. I'd love to spend time with her, and my husband, who I'd like to see once in a while. And make phone calls to friends, or just like have a life. And also the other point that I think you made, Sherri, was like, when you start freeing up that space of, okay, I don't have to look at this as a battle, but like I get to pick the cues that really I'm excited about and I feel really energized by, and I know where I'm going with it and I have an idea for, then you get to put your creative energy into it. It doesn't start to become that slog or that job, because no matter who you are, I think, 25 episodes, wall to wall music, it can burn you out. And really seeing it in a smart, strategic way of like, how do I get organized? And unlike you, Joe, I am not an organized person. But I do relate to the neurotic part of me. Like I was already second guessing. I was like, an hour before I was like texting with Goerge asking, should I use this clip or that clip? Because left to my own devices, I will second guess things. But the great thing about timelines, I've learned to really trust my gut more when it comes to music. And it's so liberating, and it ends up being the right choice so many times. So yes, I have an amazing team. They're incredible, and I'm so grateful to have them on Mira.
Yeah, I should point out that Amritha is also on the executive committee for the Composers Diversity Collective, and you've hired like half our members.
It's true. It's true. I really have.
Join if you haven't joined yet.
That's right. People join because I might be looking for yet another member of my team.
So we are starting to get questions from the audience. But anyone watching on YouTube, please like type in your questions. We'll try to get to as many as we can. This one's from Levi, who asks, when trying something new that you're not sure will be well received, do you usually make multiple versions of cues to share with your director or showrunner, or do you just go with your main idea? Let's start with you, Joe.
Earlier in my career, I would make more options. That was probably a product of my insecurity at the time, and also the fact that I started off working on lots of ads, and that's like the epicenter of options. But now I just, if something feels right, I present it. If the showrunners are the type of people that need to feel like they're part of the process, then maybe I'll present a couple alt mixes so that they can have some sort of, some agency over it and feel like they're involved in the process. But yeah, I mean, usually if something feels right, I'll just present it. And if they don't like it, we can always make something else.
How about you, Sherri?
Yeah, I'm the same way. Like have an idea, have a voice, have a point of view, go for it and believe in it. And if it's wrong, that's okay. Then then you have another point of view. But yeah, I don't think multiple, I do think, I mean, you got to read the room, right? Like sometimes, but I feel like people enjoy, when you're getting hired for any job, whether it's in music in this industry or whether you're hiring, your landscaper or whatever. I'm just like, you want someone with like, yeah, I do this, I come in with this, here's my idea. We can make adjustments. We can change course. We can do all those things. But I think that being specific, going with having a direction is very important. So I actually wouldn't prepare, or at least I wouldn't say you're preparing multiple versions. If you want to just tuck those other ones away, just be like, oh, I have this one too. But I wouldn't go into it. I would just believe in it.
Totally. I agree with both of those things. And I also just don't have the time
Right.
to like write a second. But exactly that, like, if it doesn't work, do another one. And the other thing that's kind of similar to that question though, is that I give my, before I used to like really keep a small number of stems. Now I'm just like, no, like I want the end sound to work for them on the dub stage. So in terms of giving options, I give them options on that side of things. So they can kind of, really play with things. And that's kind of where maybe I give them more creative.
Ooh, girl, you're good. I mean, I give stems so that people can have control so I don't lose my entire mix, if you have stems, you can pull it, but I don't allow for playtime. When something's approved, it's like, that's what it is.
The difference is that because we don't get the sound for the final, for animation until they're doing the dub mixes without final sound. So I don't actually have any sort of sense of what's going to resonate. And sometimes my sitar or like some high pitched element is either clashing with something they do. So, and also I trust them. That's the difference. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I know they're so careful, they're so respectful, but normally it's like that fight where you're just like, they're going to mess it up. I'm just going to give them the two mix, and then like they can either raise it or lower it because they're just going to mess everything up. But they're so respectful of doing that I feel safe doing that. So yeah, you do have to know whether you can trust them when you decide to do something like that.
Yeah.
The other thing I would mention that kind of raises is it's important to choose your collaborators wisely. Just as they're hiring you for jobs, you have the power to select with whom you want to work. And, it's important that you trust those people. It's important that you feel like you're aligned aesthetically so that you can trust your gut and give it to them, and that you're not showing up as a compromised version of yourself. It's important that you can show up as the best version of yourself and with the fullest, version of your voice.
That's great.
Yeah. I was actually just demoing this past week for the main theme of my show. And I initially had an idea for 2 different versions that I could do. And I was like, oh, it's 30 seconds. But I loved the first version that I did, that I didn't even really go into the second one. And they loved it. So I'm still working on it, but we'll see what happens. Anyways, we have a question from Joy about how you came about working with your current agent and what qualities do you value in a good composer-agent working relationship. Let's start with Amritha.
Okay, my agent is Neil Cohen. I met Neil like so many years ago, and I met him as a friend of a friend. And so we started off in that relationship, like more in a trusting, like just a colleague friend. And over the years, we would meet, he would ask me how things were going. And he would often hip pocket me for, small things. But what I value about Neil, it wasn't just that we were friends. It's that Neil was always very honest with me and very straight. I really trust his knowledge of the industry and his knowledge of me. He was always very confident in me and very able to coherently explain, things to me, and I never felt like he was talking down to me. And the one thing he has, which I think it's great to have this balance. He's very driven for me. I'm kind of, I have some drive into when it comes to the project, when I'm on a project, but never really thinking about going off and getting more work or like where, thinking of really high goals for myself. And he's really great that way at like reminding me like of different of how to put myself in that sort of different space. He, you know, I can also trust him as an extension of myself. I know he's not going to be, what's the word, like, overly cocky, or, I think we have the same approach to people. He's very respectful of people. He's built a reputation of being, smart, and so I think all those things were really.
You just ran in.
Can that be my agent? Oh my God, so cute. But anyways, yeah, I think he's great, and he really helps me. He's a great balance to me.
How about you, Joe?
I work with Bradley Rainey at WME, and I met Bradley because I was talking to Allison, who runs the music department at NBC Universal, and she was thinking about hiring me for something and asked who my agent was, and I didn't have an agent at the time. And she suggested Amos Newman, who was running the department at WME at that time. And we just hit it off, and Bradley was the young gun in the office at the time. And over time, Amos moved on to other projects or to another position at Endeavor, and Bradley and I, kind of were in the same place in our career, and it made sense for us to work together. But for the first almost 10 years that I was scoring films and TV, I didn't have an agent. I wasn't searching for one. Everybody always said, when you need one, they'll seek you out, or something to that effect. And Mike Post always told me, like, look, you're the person that's in charge of procuring your own work. And he started with, Sam, it was Gorfain and Schwartz. Both of those guys kind of started with Mike and built their empire with him, and, some other notable composers, but he was a big part of it. And he said, look, those guys never got me a single job, but it's worth it just to have someone else negotiate the deals for you. And so that I found that to be true. But then also, once I started getting some kind of more noteworthy projects, it's been great because Bradley can kind of run with that and help, find opportunities.
Sherri, do you have anything to add? And actually, let me just add on to that question. Do you, how often are you communicating to your agent? Like,
I was actually going to say that. For me, and I'm sure a lot of us are the same way too, that I think what I really enjoy about the relationship I have with my agent and agency is that there's a lot of communication. And it's not like pestering. It's always like, hey, sometimes it's just simple checking in. Like, how are you doing? How are you doing over there? Like, are you alive? Kind of thing. And there's a lot of, I think, because I think the original question, right, was like, how do you, like, what makes a good agent relationship or something? But I think, as everyone's saying, it's a personal thing. Like, I think it's a really great way to say it, Amritha. It's like, it's an extension of you. They're representing you. They're not getting you jobs, but they could be screaming your name to people like, oh, you should check out, they're selling you. They're trying to sell you. They're trying to get you into a room. So the relationship you want is, you want that communication, because if you don't have that back and forth, as some of my ideas are changing, or like, hey, I'm pretty burnt out, so can we like maybe not go after these kinds of projects, or not go after this kind of thing, because it's and also creatively, it's like, I've got this thing going on. I creatively, if I'm going to go for something else after this thing ends, I'd like it to be something maybe in this creative world, but I connected with, I think it's true. I think what Joe is saying and what Mike Post has said, I think we've all heard it before. It's like, you don't need to go after one, they'll come to you. And it happened at least that way for me, where I did take a couple of meetings throughout the past decade, but it wasn't until somebody reached out to me and said, I found your music. I love your music. I really resonate with that. I would love to help you go after projects that that your music might fit, or something like that. So, it's kind of like, I want you, I think we want someone who's excited about us just as much as we're excited about what we go for. And I think that's the kind of symbiotic relationship. And it is true. Like, you are responsible for getting your own stuff, but you still, it's really helpful and it's worth everything to have somebody in your court who can maybe even help you strategize if you're that kind of person. I'm that kind of person where it's like, I need some perspective here. I need some counsel because, we all get lost in what we're doing. And let's face it, we're the artists, we're the creatives. We can't always keep our mind on, what else is going on, what the tenor of the industry is doing. It's moving and shaking, but we're so tunnel vision in our projects that it's really good to have that person who's like, hey, there's something coming up that I think you might want to know about. So I think those are the kind of relationships that we as artists should have with our agents, I think.
Absolutely. And just to add on, one of the things that's been so helpful is to build a reel. I can't tell you, I feel like I'm the worst judge of, I don't know if all composers are like this, we're like the worst judges of our own music, but it's like, it's helpful to have somebody else's perspective and sort of, somebody you can judge, having heard so much music that's out there, and sort of know where you fit and what's your strengths are, and how position that in a reel, and knowing which audience will receive the reel, knowing the studios, what they like to hear first. And just some of that's so helpful just to take that off my plate, because I will perseverate about each placement and think about it more than probably is even necessary.
I'll add a quick counterpoint to kind of this discussion of, I've never had an agent come after me, but I just haven't reached that level yet. But over the years, I've met lots of agents. I've had meetings, I've kept in touch, and just kind of formed relationships with various people. That and this is something that Chris Lennox told me was, when you get your first big gig and you need someone to negotiate for you, you call up the person you want to work with as your agent, and you just ask them to negotiate. And that's a great way to kind of start that relationship, is bringing something to them.
So true.
So anyways, we've got another question from Renee, and this is for Amritha. What was your transition from independent film world to studio projects? What were some challenges you weren't expecting?
I'd say building the team was a big thing. I met with Tony Morales, who's also one of the executive on the CDC, because he did Elena Babalor. And he was an amazing resource and just so generous with his time. And the first thing he said to me is, yeah, so who's your assistant? And I was like, oh, I don't. He's like, you need to get on that, now. And I was like, okay, I will get that happening. And literally 3 weeks later, he's like, so how did it go? How and I was like, oh, so building a team was really crucial for me. And because especially since I didn't know just sort of the basics of what you need to get under control to make your deliveries and to make things happen on time, especially since I decided to have score mixing as part of my process. Some people do score mixing themselves, but I hired 2 incredible score mixers who, just because of all of our work and divvying it all out, they do each half of Mira. So it's just I have a fairly big team of people, but it evolved over time. So getting a team was a big thing. I'm trying to think. Also when you work with independent filmmakers, you're coming at it from a very artistic, sort of open-minded process. It's very organic. Working with a studio system where, especially Disney, that this was a brand new project that they're putting out to the world. They cared so much about it. Their first foray into the South Asian world. There were a lot of music people. There were executives at the meetings. I had 7 people cramming into the room. When I went to the Disney TVA studios, and that was a bit of a shock to try and figure out who to make sure I listen to, who do I make sure I impress, or and how to take all of their notes and do it in a timely fashion. I was very lucky that Disney TVA was very kind to me and very helped me along, but that was very daunting, having all these people weighing in with notes. And having versions and being able to just let go of things and move quickly, because I seemed to feel like when I was working on independent film, I had all this time to work on one reel. I have no idea what I did with that time. I did have coffee and things. I mean, it was just nuts. Now you just don't have that luxury of time. I'm also delivering fully mocked up things. I was a bit lazy or maybe just like lax with the way that I can present to filmmakers. When you're like in a studio with them, they come into your space and you can have a very relaxed situation. When you're presenting, you know, at a much professional level to TV studios, they have a really high expectation of what they want to hear. They want to have it TV ready by the time they're listening to it. And so all those things were sort of big learning curves for me. I'm sure that the two of you can also add to that because you've had that experience as well.
Well, actually, I just want to shout out Tony Morales really quick, because I had that same phone call with him like a few weeks ago, and he's like, "Here's all the things I told Amritha." But that's the great thing about our organization, the Composers Diversity Collective, is that we have enough members who are, you know, working composers that are more than happy to give this kind of advice. So, you know, reach out to one of us, or, you know, go to the mixers and just
gonna put Tony's phone number in the chat.
He's like, thanks, guys.
Yeah.
His phone is like, ah.
Do you guys have anything to add, or I can move on to the next question?
Yeah, let's keep it moving. And
Yeah, Amritha said it all. She said it all.
Well, let's keep this brief because we've got two more great questions. First one is, how do you overcome writer's block?
Work in television.
Yep.
You just
100%.
There's no time for writer's block. You just keep going. And like Amritha, and I'm sure Joey, there's probably all of you guys, because we all play instruments of some kind. Like improvise. Just improvise. Just put your hands on your instrument, whatever. Like raise piano. Just start playing something. Pull up a new patch. Pull out. You know. I mean, sometimes if I'm like, it's not so. I think my version of writer's block is that everything I'm writing is crap. So it's not like I don't have an idea. It's just like they're all crap. They're all like bad ideas.
I think that's stage one of all of our, like, it's such a relatable feeling.
Yeah. So so sometimes I'll pull up like a random patch of like, you know, I don't know, just any random instrument, whether it's a synth or whether it's like, this is a violin, or like a cello staccato is one of my favorite to improvise on, because it has enough of a range for me as a pianist that I can get my bass and I can get my higher notes, but it's not piano, because sometimes for me, I can only hear piano when I'm playing piano. You know, I can't hear, I mean, sure, okay, that'll be violins, or sure, that'll be something else. But in that creative process, I don't know, for sometimes for me, it's like just having a stringed instrument of some kind. So sometimes just really kicking out the walls of your mind, or doing something that you would never, ever do. Like, this is such an emotional scene and I can't find like the right thing. Well, put some comedy music over it, and just, you know, knowing that full on that it's wrong, but then you'll be like, no, okay, but I don't know. For me, it just kind of jars the whole thing and just, you know, shakes me on a tree. Then just look at the clock and be like, oh yeah, well, one of these ideas got to work. So just shove it in and keep doing it until it makes sense. You know, that's for me.
I have some tips. I use a timer, and I only allow myself a certain amount of time per cue. It's like self-imposed deadline. So then it becomes like a game. Another thing is letting the scene dictate the score. So the first thing that I find is the rhythm of the scene, by the way it's cut. Then I always try to narrow things down as soon as possible, as far as like defining a palette for the show and talking to the creators of the show about, you know, which instruments might best voice the show. Another thing is remembering that for any scene, there's an infinite amount of cues that can be equally as effective. So you don't have to find the perfect cue, you just have to find one of those. And then another thing is go on a walk and do something to kind of distract yourself for a little while, because that's when lots of good ideas come. And then when you do feel like everything that you're doing is garbage, remember that that's probably not true, and that's probably your own ego or something else happening in your mind. So I don't really get writer's block all that often when I'm scoring, also because I feel like I don't have to be the arbiter of whether or not it's working. I'm servicing somebody else's project. I'm making a meal for somebody else, right? So when I'm working on my own songs, that's when I'm more likely to get writer's block, because then I am the arbiter and I have to make those final decisions. And but these kind of techniques that I've developed over 20 years doing film and TV has helped me write my own music in a less painful way too. So
Great tips. Thank you.
Yeah, those are good.
Cool. Well, our next question is from Renee. You could go back to before you got your first solo studio gig. What would you teach yourself to be ready for? Anyone?
I don't know. I'm ready to, it's like I'm thinking about that for me, and there are lots of things I would change about what I wrote, just because we all progress as artists. But I feel like, I don't know. I would say don't ask yourself questions like that, because this is a process of like, but let's get deep for a second. This is a process of like self-love. You know what I'm saying? Like you have to, like we're gonna have to grow. There's always things that we wish we could change, but I feel like we're, just, I don't know, try to sink into the moment of being an artist, be as fearless as possible with your decisions, but adaptable, and it's, I think all of this just comes with experience. The idea of like Amritha, you were talking about like, being in the room and having all these people just stare at you and listen to your music, and everyone gets an opinion and everybody's right. And our job is to work with that. And I feel like that doesn't change whatever level you're at, whatever studio, film, small film, independent project, commercial, friends, bar mitzvah film. That doesn't change. Those are, offering yourself as an artist and receiving notes back, because this is a service industry. It doesn't matter what profile the project is, the studio, the solo credit, anything. Honestly, I think writing for another composer is way harder, I think, than writing for your filmmaker of any kind. It's difficult on many different levels, but having someone say, oh, I wish we could just can it feel funnier here? But having someone say, well, I don't really like how you went to the fourth here. I think that's the orchestration is completely bogus. It's like that, I feel like that's way harder. So anyway, I would say like, it's all the same. Like when you're reading the room, when you're making your artistic choices, it's the same no matter where you are, what project you're on, I think.
That's great. Joe, do you want to answer?
You go ahead.
Okay, the one thing what that made me think of is just like, I got all Buddhist. So speaking of like getting deep, I was like, I can't really change, we're here, we're where we are. And I only would have only gotten to this point in my process if I hadn't made the mistakes. Like I needed to make those mistakes. I needed to get to this place in the voice of Mira, or the journey I'm on. Like it's all necessary. And I'm really glad that I think the main thing is just to hang in there, like just stick it out. No matter how hard it, like whether it's that moment where you're like, oh my God, everything I'm writing sucks right now. I can't believe I thought I had a voice. Like all those things that you tell yourself in that moment, just to stick it out, just to keep at it, just to keep going. I think that's like the only thing. It's maybe a very unsatisfactory thing to say, but in terms of what I would just tell myself is just to keep going.
I would add something. In terms of, for me, I thought I was terrible at technology. And so I thought I could never be someone's assistant. And, I've learned a lot on my own since then, but going back, if I would have maybe pursued an assistant job, I could have actually learned a little bit more of how people run their studios, run their teams, how to organize. There's just so much you could learn from someone else that I never had. And I kind of figured out my own way, but if I could go back and do things over, I would have maybe done that just to kind of get a little more insight into that process. Well, anything else you want to add, Joe, or you've got another question?
Let's move on to the other question. I think we've covered it.
So this is from Pak. Have you ever gotten a project or job you just totally hated? And did you stick it out or did you leave?
I can answer that because it depends on what part of your career you're in. I would never say that I hated a particular project, but there have been projects that didn't resonate with me artistically, or the people turned out to be difficult people. And I would say early on, I really tried to view those projects as a learning exercise. And I had to do so somewhat out of necessity because I needed to make money. I needed to make a living. But I think it's also helpful to just learn. I mean, most of this job, I would say, is interpersonal communication. Once you have that together, then the music almost writes itself. So I think all of those kind of early experiences with difficult people or difficult projects and trying to find something, find some sort of joy in it was really helpful. I think about, Morricone, one of my very favorite composers, and how many B movies he did and how awesome the music is for those movies, even though lots of those movies no one cares about anymore, but the soundtracks are still incredible. So you can always carve out a space for yourself if you're creative and you follow it. But that said, there has been some instances where, I recognize that the project wasn't right or boundaries were not being respected. Those kind of things where I had to walk away, very, very rarely, because I think I'm usually pretty good at sussing out the situation ahead of time. But and doing that is really hard because, some of those projects were things that I would have leapt at just a few years before, but it's important to recognize your value and to not put yourself in a position where you can't show up and do your best work. That's the bottom line. So if that's the people or the organization or the material, and you recognize that, I would say it's always good to walk away as soon as possible if you have the means to do so.
That's good advice.
Mhm. Solid.
What project are you on, Pac, that you don't like? Let's air it. Let's air it out.
Oh,
I love everything I'm working on. No, I do think you're right, Joe. That's actually that's a great question too, and a great answer. But I think the bottom line is, when it's not right if you can't do the job that you were hired to do, right? Like if there are just enough things working against you, enough roadblocks, whatever they might be, whether it be on the side of production or whether it be on wherever it is, if you know that you cannot work under these conditions, if you know that you can't do the job you were hired to do, and that your name isn't going, and your brand isn't going to survive whatever this is, then it's time to take a look, I think, and I think you know when you know. But I really like what you're saying, Joe, about because I needed to hear that personally for myself. Like, yeah, there's always something we can learn. There's always something we can gain. And it is about the journey of it. So it's all about this learning process. If anything, you'll get some probably damn good music from it, that you can have for your reel.
And if it's a situation where it's that you're discovering that because I think there's that fallacy that you can write everything. That we can, all of us should be able to and are capable of writing everything. And maybe deep down we can if we spent a really long time at it, but obviously with deadlines we can't. And if there's some way that if part of the problem or the challenge is that it's the style of writing that you're discovering, I can't find my way in, maybe it's time to find a collaborator or additional writer or someone you can sort of work with to take that pressure off, and then find the cues that sort of like that we have to do from a practical standpoint for TV, but maybe in your case that could help too.
Yeah,
the other thing I'll add is we're spending more time with the people with whom we're working on these projects more often than our families, our loved ones. So it's really, really important that that's a draw, that we get to spend time with these people. That's one of my favorite things about this job, is that I can be working with Pendleton Ward on an animated series, and then the next week work with Natasha Lyonne. And I love the people that I work with, but if there is a toxic person and there is no way to kind of circumvent that person, I'm likely to just walk away, because I just don't want to spend my life with people like that. And when you add it all up, if I think about my career, I mean, these are the people I've spent most of my life with, as an adult. So I want that to be enriching my life rather than causing undue stress.
For sure.
Yeah, that is just such great advice to end on. So I want to thank all of you for making the time to do this. Just as we're wrapping up, I'd love to just give you guys each a chance to share any last thoughts, or if you don't have any last thoughts, a fun fact about yourself. And I'll kick it off. A fun fact about me is one of the reasons I really fell in love with music was it was my ticket out of Chinese school when I was a kid, because I hated Chinese school, but it was the same time as youth symphony orchestra rehearsals, so that was like how I got out of Chinese school.
So do you speak Chinese now?
Yeah, 我会讲一点中文。
You got enough.
Well, yeah, Joe, any last thoughts?
No. I just think it's important to follow the visceral joy and creative fulfillment, and that's what's going to open up the doors. When I first moved to LA, I definitely reached out to all my professional contacts, and I had a whole list of like 200 people that I, over the course of the first year I was here, had coffee with or lunch or blah blah blah. But it was really, so that was my attempt at networking in a deliberate way. But really, the people that I met as part of a community, or just that I resonated with, that's what led to creative fulfillment and ultimately career opportunities. But again, like, I guess I'll hit on what I started with, is just take whatever agency you have, write your own score, like write your own symphony, write your own songs, do whatever you can on your own that will bring you joy. And that's what's going to open up opportunities. At least that's what I've found.
Absolutely. Amritha, last thoughts or fun fact?
Fun fact about me. I'll pass on the fun fact. I like crossword puzzles. I don't know if that's a fun fact. I also am growing praying mantises in my garden right now. But I think that, look, this is a long-term project in terms of making your way through this, through film. And I think that sometimes, there's that sort of eagerness and like desire to make it happen tomorrow. It's a really long time. It's taken me 10, 15 years to get to here. And I think that that's actually, it was useful. All those things that I discovered and about myself. I also did like the writing, a cue a day, writing a song a day, like just, all those journeys, all those important musical expressions that I went along, I think were so important to get to here. And also, if I had been given really big projects too soon, you want to be able to succeed. You want to be able to hit it out of the park. And so it's good to get a lot of, shorts and B movies and all those things, early in your career, so that you can really start to discover your skills and your strengths. But yeah, also like a sad pitch, but just a really truthful, like honest, like invitation to join the CDC, because, doing it alone is hard, and having that solidarity of other people who are in it with you, it goes so far. So I think that where you can build community to help you along the way, and like where you can like say, hey, how much is a basic rate for, doing a short, or like, hey, does anyone play flute, and can like, record tonight? Like all those things are so great to have in this community. So I encourage you to join and call on us when you need us.
It's been a big year for both CDCs.
Oh,
Exactly.
so true.
Cool. Sherri, any last thoughts?
These were all wonderful. I've learned so much. I guess maybe the last thing I want to say is this simple, like, thank you for doing this. Thank you guys for also for just, having the CDC available to all of us in the community. And yeah, I think that I personally am moving into a phase in my life and my career where I'm really am focusing on the journey of it, and like, this is what we have and this is what there is. And it took me a really long time to get there, because I was one of those like super eager people that was always looking for the next thing, not because I wasn't happy with what I had. It's just I had this sense that it's not enough, and we have to let that we have to calm that down. And this is all great advice. And I enjoy talks like these because it allows us to focus on like the art of what we're doing and sort of get a little bit out of the business side of things, which I think is, I think of like, in this particular industry, it's like we're marrying the art with the business side, and it's like this marriage made in heaven, but it kind of thrives in hell, and it's a really, really hard place to be. So I think just know where your grounding is, know where your perspective lies, and I think everyone will be better for it. Your music will be better for it. My music will be better for it. So, yeah, there it is.
Cool. Well, I just want to thank all of you for taking the time to do this. I learned a lot, and it was great to get to know more about each of you, and I look forward to seeing much more of your work on screen.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks to everybody. Yeah.
You guys later. Yeah, hopefully we'll see you in person next time.
Yay.
All right, bye.
Get vaccinated, everybody.
Get that.